Hi, I'm Michael Killen. Many people are torn most of their lives. Sometimes when they're a child or a little older, they have a passion for, let's say, acting, music, writing, literature. However, as they progress, they also realize they must make a living. And there is a conflict, some avocation that they have a great passion for, but yet the need to have a vocation. On this program, I have a guest named Marion O'Leary, who has had that conflict all his life, and we're going to discuss, and he's going to share how he has dealt with it and how he has evolved, and possibly that'll help you become more adjusted or bring your children forward more effectively. Marion, how are you today?
Michael, it's good to see you again. It's been a while since we've been here together.
Did I paint you as a psychiatrist?
Not quite, but that wouldn't be far wrong. Certainly part of what I do is a lot of interaction with people, and you have to study people, you have to understand them, and so even though I'm not a therapist myself, I've certainly had a lot of them in the family.
All right. I want to mention that, yes, you wrote a book, Musical Milestones. So
Right.
we know right then and there you know a lot about music. But before we get into that passion of your life, I want to go into your other area of great expertise, science. And am I correct? You work for the Carnegie Institute of Sciences, but you have to...
The Carnegie Institution for Science.
Oh, they changed it.
Well, they have. Actually, you're right about that. But the other thing that's interesting is that there are many organizations with the name Carnegie.
Oh, really?
And whenever we go around talking to people around the country, they always get confused. And so we always have to stop and explain that of the many Carnegie organizations, we are the one which is principally in the area of science.
Okay. Now, there is this important scientific organization that really is the authority in the world on
Right.
climate change. And it's the Intergovernmental Panel
Right.
on Climate Change.
That's correct.
And is that a UN organization?
It is indeed. Yeah.
All right. And in the United States, am I correct, there are 3 generals?
Actually, it's worldwide.
Worldwide.
The IPCC has been putting together reports on the state of the climate, how it's changing, how much we understand, how we need to understand, and what we should do about it. This has been going on now for more than 20 years. And the 5th of their reports is about to come out. The first part of it will be out in a couple of weeks. The last part will be out about next March. But worldwide, there are 3 large groups of scientists, 500, 800 each, working on these 3 parts of this.
Okay, so there's 3 great generals
Right.
worldwide, and you are an advisor to one of them.
I work with one of the leaders of one of the groups,
Okay.
right.
And I believe his name is Chris Field.
Right.
Okay, and he's really respected, known worldwide in the
Absolutely.
scientific community. So, so before we get into your conflict, you know some of the findings of this, the new version of the study.
I've only seen bits and pieces. Supposedly, none of this has been released yet, but in the last couple of weeks, a fair amount of it has been leaking to the press. So we've been seeing pieces of this in a number of news sources, but it's not really public knowledge yet. Won't be for a couple of weeks.
Okay, but I am under the impression that a few years ago, some of the great scientists like Steve Schneider helped make forecasts of the impact of climate change.
Right.
And that the new study may say something like this. So first of all, Steve's and others' forecasts were considered just way over the top, you know, unrealistic, okay? But am I correct that the new finding of this study is going to say something like climate change is happening 10 times faster than, or many times more faster than even as Steve had predicted?
10 times is more than it is, but the problem is when you predict what the climate is going to be like 5, 10, 20, 50 years from now, you have to make a lot of assumptions. And as time passes and we keep working on this, the assumptions keep getting better, but they're all still assumptions. So there will be, at a particular point in time, and this is a good time to be talking about because this report is about to come out, but there will be not one prediction, there will be a whole family of predictions because different scientists make slightly different assumptions. And the statement that people are making is you get this whole set of possible pictures, and we're closer to the more pessimistic ones than to the more optimistic ones.
Okay, so I want to ask you, is climate change, because I know you're up there with the leaders in the world, is climate change a problem? And is the problem getting worse, and must we address it? Or is it something we ought to leave for our grandkids?
No, it needs to be addressed now, not sometime in the future. Because things are happening, the atmosphere is changing, more carbon dioxide is going into the atmosphere. This is not something that we should be putting off until some future date.
Okay, and am I correct, 400 parts per million was sort of a break point?
That was one of the points that people were really concerned about, yes.
And the growth is
continuing.
It's continuing.
It's slowing down.
And soon it will be 1,000 parts per million.
It won't be 1,000 parts per million soon. It won't be there in our lifetime, but it certainly is continuing to grow.
Okay, so it's a problem people should, okay, so we have established here, and I'm glad I've had the opportunity for you to clarify some of the big scientific issues of our day. So, you wrote a book.
I wrote a book.
And may I see it?
Please.
And it is Musical Milestones. And I was wondering if we could get a photo of it. You have a good photo of it? And tell me, first of all, I have read part of it. You tell me what it's about or why you made it.
I originally wrote it for my grandchildren. It occurred to me that we all, after a while, or many of us have grandchildren, we want to leave them something. We want them to have some stories about what life was like for us when we were growing up. I would like to tell them, for example, about my grandparents. And so I started writing this little narrative, which would tell some of the stories of my life that I thought they would be interested in. Well, like most good projects, this one just kept getting bigger and bigger. And so the grandchildren, that original idea is still there, but I realized there were so many other things that needed to be told, and that a lot of the stories really were pertinent to a lot of other people besides just grandchildren or members of my own family.
Can you give us a story?
Well, go back to when I was 11 years old. I'd been playing the piano, sort of, for about 2 or 3 years. My mother had been teaching me. And I was doing okay. So she said, I think it's time we found you a real piano teacher. So she found someone. We got in the car. We drove to the next town. This is in a small town in Illinois. We drove to the next town. We went knocking on the door. You know, I'm not very big. My mother's in charge. I follow along. But it's a little bit spooky. So this woman opens the door, and she is huge. Yeah. She says, hello, come in. She's very kind. But she says, next time, don't knock, just come on in. Yeah. So we went in. I looked around. It was dark. All the curtains were covered over. There was piles of music everywhere. There was one piano here. There was another piano here. It was sort of dark and musty. It was a little spooky.
But how did it make you feel?
Scared.
Scared, really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know this lady.
Yeah.
I have no idea what we're going to do or anything like that. She and my mother are chatting away, and I'm sort of not, trying to stay out of the way, hoping they won't notice me. But finally they realize, oh, we brought Marion for a piano lesson. So then I realized there's this huge piano. Biggest piano I have ever seen. It's an upright. It's not even a grand, but it was huge. And so she says, okay, sit down. Well, here's the piano bench. I sit down. It takes me a while to find middle C. At that stage, you've got to worry about those things. She sits down beside me, much too close. And she's a big woman, too. So Here I am. What do I do now? She says, play something. And I said, uh-oh. I hadn't even thought of it. You know, it hadn't occurred to me that I needed to walk in able to play something the first day. So, fortunately, I had some music with me. I opened it up, and I played the theme from Beethoven's Ode to Joy, the last movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Before I finished, she reaches over, and she did this a lot. She reaches over, she puts her hands on my hands, stops me from playing, and she starts this homily about what a wonderful piece it is and how it inspires us all and all that sort of thing. And so I got through my first lesson. But it got better after that. But it was a little scary the first time out.
All right, but what are we to take from that?
That we all have to confront new experiences, new people, new things, new ideas, and be prepared to deal with them.
So that's what you wanted your grandchildren to pick up from that story?
Yeah, you know, grandchildren see you and they think you've been around forever, you're so competent. They can't imagine you ever being intimidated by anything that would happen to you. So these stories help in putting all of that together for them.
So your first introduction to music, training, education was classical music. Would that be correct?
Well, even earlier than that, my grandparents, who lived on a farm, had an old player piano. And even from the time I was about 2, I would climb up on the bench and sort of do this sort of thing. I thought it was really great. I was really having a good time. I thought it was wonderful music. My parents were very tolerant, never gave me any grief or not. But then by the time I was about 5, my mother decided I needed real lessons. And so it was very much a classical training initially.
Okay, so I can imagine that continued, that training.
Yes, right.
Through elementary school and who knows,
high school, right.
High school. But then music certainly does take a lot of study and a lot of practice. And there is a science to it, of course. But how did this passion, I guess, also for your work in the area of science come about?
I was always curious. Whatever I was around, whether it was leaves or trees or rocks or anything else like that, I always had a lot of curiosity. I played with things, I collected things. Early in my elementary school years, my parents started buying me things like chemistry sets and biology sets and other things like that. But somehow I was always very much a self-starter with regard to that. I would get these things and I would go off and I would spend hours by myself working through them. So it just sort of happened to me very naturally.
Okay. But your passion, is it for the music now? Or and the science is also there, but
let's go back and try to bring those two halves together, because that's really the key to the book, and it helps tell the story. So early on, I had music. After that initial experience with my lessons, I started getting better. I started playing in music contests and things like that. I wasn't a very good pianist when I was young, but I was good enough, and I kept getting better. At the same time, this interest in science was continuing to develop. And I began to realize that there were sort of two halves of me, the half that wanted to do music and the half that wanted to do science. And by sometime in late elementary school, I realized that there was going to be a problem here, that someday I would have to make a living, find a job that paid a decent wage. And the question was, how was I going to do it? Well, I could have thought about music. I could have thought about science. I'm in a small town. I don't have a lot of role models. I looked around. I said, what do I have in my world in the way of people that do music? What would my life be like if I were to become a musician? Well, my only musical models were music teachers.
All right.
My piano teacher, the guy who directed the band, the lady who played the piano in the church, and things like that. And I looked at that and I said, I don't think so.
Okay. So at that point, did you also look in that little town for science?
I did
mentors?
indeed. Yeah.
Did you find any?
I came closer We had science teachers, we had the local pharmacist who was an interesting role model, and we had people who had technical training, and I wasn't discriminating between one kind of science and another at that point, but you know, there were engineers around, there were people doing science in the school and elsewhere, so I had better models in that case.
And that's when you made the decision. You would go on.
It really was very early, but the nice thing was that at least through high school, it was perfectly possible to carry both of those tracks successfully. Yeah. The science became easy for me, and so I could get that done and get it out of the way. Then I had time for my piano, my trombone, playing in the band, playing in the dance band, all those other things. So there was no real conflict yet up through high school.
Before I ask you, when did the conflict, okay, I just want to add, you pointed out how valuable it is for children to have good role models.
Absolutely.
It can affect whether they go that way, or that way, or whatever. So tell us about the conflict.
Well, the conflict begins sort of at this point in the story, about the time I finish high school and start college, because high school was reasonably easy in those days in that small town. I could do my high school work and still have plenty of time for music and the occasional other thing besides girls, whatever else. But college was different. Major university, taking a fairly heavy load, a lot of science and math courses. And although I entered college with the intent of doing both science and music, I soon began to realize that there just wasn't going to be time. The first thing that happened to me was I got into the best university band. I was also in the football band, and between those things I was out rehearsing with the bands about 4 or 5 days a week. But as I got into my second and third years of science courses, I was in the lab every afternoon. And you know, there are only 7 days in the week and they only teach labs, 5 of them. So there simply wasn't time. And that was really the beginning of that conflict.
And you let the music
at the end of my sophomore year, I made an appointment, went to the director of bands, and I said, I'm sorry, but I just don't have time. I really want to stay. And I still regret that decision to this day, but I really didn't have any choice. So at that point, symbolically, I sold my trombone.
Okay.
And that was sort of the end of music for a while.
Okay. And so, so then you went and got a couple of master's degrees maybe, or one?
Just a PhD.
Oh, just a PhD.
Yeah,
oh,
I mean,
that's all.
In some no, the distinction is that in some areas you get a bachelor's degree first and then a master's and then a PhD. In some fields you skip the master's degree and go directly to the PhD.
Okay.
So that's what I did.
So how about advancing forward a bit to some meaningful place where the music came back?
Let's jump ahead through my undergraduate degree. And I graduated in mid-year and started graduate school. Well, everybody else had been there since the beginning of the year, so I was already sort of behind. So the first semester was really hard. I did okay, no real problems with the courses, but again, it was on the verge of life-threatening. Second semester was a little bit better. I began to realize I really could compete in that environment. Then I passed my graduate preliminary exams, and it was time that I was starting to feel better about things. So I started getting really wistful for some music again.
Yes.
The place where I was living had a nice grand piano and a music room. So I said, I'm going to start playing again.
Okay.
So I got a book of Beethoven, and I started working on a Beethoven sonata. And I spent about, 3, 4, 5 months on it, really getting back into it again, realizing how good it felt and how nice it was to be back to that. So that was my first experience of going away from music and coming back. But it's an experience I've had again and again.
So tell me, at what point did you make the decision to write this book? And that book, writing it, helps you rectify or reconcile?
Absolutely, absolutely. I guess that was 2.5 or 3 years ago that I decided that the book was a good project. And I hadn't understood at that point exactly what it was going to be about. I knew that it had music, it had family, it had people, it had science, but I didn't understand the total dynamic of how the book would finally look.
How does it look? Give us some insights.
Every chapter, the reason the milestones is in the title is that every chapter has a piece of music which is important from the time of that chapter. For example, the chapter that talks about my beginning in graduate school that I was just telling you about, the Beethoven sonata that I was working on then is the music that goes with that particular chapter. So at the end of every chapter there is a page with a milestone on it, which is a description of a particular piece of music.
And I can go on, it takes me to the web and I can hear that music?
You can do that too. Yeah, if you go to my website, there are URLs that will get you to several different performances of each of these pieces of music.
So each chapter, for the most part, you have a narrative.
Yes.
And then you give the reader a pointer to the web to hear the actual music, or is that right?
At the end of the chapter there is a separate section which is the description of the music, and then the URL that gets you to the website, you can either go on the web and find it yourself, or the best way to do it is to go to my website and go from there.
And your website is?
www.marionoleary.com.
Okay. Now you and I are probably about the same age.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you said you wrote this book for your grandchildren, but the world is big. And who else did you expect people my age to read this book and obtain value from it?
There are a lot of people in professions, in the sciences, in mathematics, in medicine and elsewhere, professional degrees, very highly trained, people who have a passion for music. People who, like me, started out thinking they might want to be musicians and ultimately decided that science or medicine or something else like that was what they really wanted to do. So this book is for them. This book is for anyone who has struggled to rectify two passions that push them in their lives.
So you seem to define it as highly trained professionals
Mm-hmm.
who have been forced, I guess, to make a living, etc., to study that profession, work hard at it, and they've let this love, this other passion just, okay? But what about the rest of the public that may not have the level of education of a doctor or a PhD, but also sort of has been forced to work in some area, but they'd rather be writing plays or songs. Is this book for them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there are many such people. The thing that ultimately limits you is time, particularly at the midpoints of your career. As you get older and you can sort of slow down in your professional life a little bit, you can maybe do this a little better. But it's those years in your 40s and 50s, say, or maybe even before that, that it really is a challenge. And it's a matter of defining a life for yourself that enables you to pay attention to both muses.
Okay. Now, I've read a couple of chapters, but I would like you to tell us some of the music that you are going to remind us of that has been part of all of our lives that we'll find in your book.
The interesting thing that people tell me as they look at the book is they are surprised at the variety of music that's in there, because my original training was classical music. I've done a lot of jazz. I've not so much played, but certainly listened to a lot of folk music and rock. So you will find, depending on where you are, pieces from the recent rock literature, pieces from classical. To give you an example, there's a chapter about teaching, me as a university teacher. And the music that goes with us is Teach Your Children, Graham Nash, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. You go back to the chapter I was talking about before and you have a Beethoven sonata. You go back to the very first chapter in the book, which is the story of my mother's family history, and you get Londonderry because the family came from Londonderry, Ireland. So, oh, and Miles Davis is in there. All sorts of people are in there.
So this is a book that as one reads it, it reminds us of where we've been in some cases.
Yes.
And then it points us to the music, and it's a combination of narrative and music, your book.
Yes.
And so when you go out, you just go to bookstores to make the public aware of your book, or how do you handle
I
it?
have a different way of handling that. Lots of people who write books go places and stand up and read, and that's fine. And I do some of that, but the music is so integral to the story that what I do is I will read a story, which is some fraction of a chapter, and then I will play on the piano the music that goes with us. Example. Everybody knows, almost everybody knows, a very famous piece by Miles Davis called So What? There is a chapter that talks about my time as a young professor where I was trying to establish myself, prove myself, and I used the So What theme as a way of talking about how you prove yourself, how you have to be able to convince your colleagues about what you are doing, the science that you are doing, and they say, so what? You talk about the people who give you the money. They say to you, so what? You talk to your students, they say, why am I doing this? So what? So it ties the music in with the story.
You've been a wonderful guest, and the holidays, the Christmas holidays are coming up, and this is a wonderful gift for people to give to their family, their children, their grandchildren, and their friends. So,
I would
Marion,
be happy.
I'm the kind of person who tends to pull multiple things together, like a narrative and my art, and I have appreciation for what you've done here.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for sharing this with us. Okay?
My pleasure.
And I just want to put this up here, but maybe we can, see it. So the show is basically over.